Hey math lovers, Miss Amber here again. Today we're going to be talking about angle relationships. So the angle relationships we're going to deal with have intersecting lines. That's the only way you can get angles, right? Is when you intersect lines. But we're also going to talk about when you have a line that intersects multiple lines. So when you have a line that goes through multiple lines, we call that line a transversal. If that transversal goes through a set of parallel lines, then we have some very specific congruent and supplementary relationships that are created. So remember, parallel lines are lines that never intersect, they never touch, right? So if we draw two parallel lines and then a transversal that goes through them, let's see how many angles are created. Well, we'll count them. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. We have 8 individual angles that are created. And some of them, like I said, have some very special relationships. So the first thing you might notice is there's 4 acute angles and there's 4 obtuse angles. So a secret is all 4 of those acute angles are congruent to each other. That means they're all the same measure. If one of those acute angles is 30 degrees, all of them will be 30 degrees, as long as your lines are parallel. So then you have 4 obtuse angles. All 4 of those obtuse angles then are going to be, what do you think? Absolutely congruent as well. Each acute angle and obtuse angle, so if I take one acute angle, one obtuse angle, and I put them together, I'm gonna get supplementary angles. So you might remember that the word supplementary means 2 angles that add up to 180 degrees. So all of these angle pairs are gonna have one of 2 relationships. They're either gonna be congruent or they're gonna be supplementary. So let's start with some simple ones. Let's start with vertical angles. So you don't actually need 2 parallel lines for the vertical angles, you just need 2 intersecting lines. Vertical angles are simply going to be angles that are across the vertex from one another, so on opposite sides of the vertex. And you notice the word vertical and the word vertex both start with the first 4 same letters, V-E-R-T, so they go together. Those angles, you notice, are the same size, so they're going to be congruent. That means they're going to have the same measure. Then we have linear pairs. Again, you don't need parallel lines for those, you just need intersecting lines. Linear pairs are going to be 2 angles. A pair is a group of 2 things. So a linear pair is going to be 2 angles that when you put them together, they make a straight line. Notice the word linear starts with the word line. So linear pair literally means 2 angles that make a straight line. So a straight line will always measure 180 degrees. So you notice your linear pair, those are 2 different sized angles. One's acute and one is obtuse. So they're going to come together and they're going to be 180, right? They're going to be supplementary. Now let's talk about some more complicated relationships that require both of these parallel lines. We have corresponding angles. The word corresponding literally means in the same position. So when you look for corresponding angles, you're looking for angles that are in the same position or the same corner relative to your parallel line and your transversal. So if I have an angle that's above the parallel line and to the left of the transversal, I want to find its matching pair that is also above the other parallel line and on the left side of the transversal. Those would be corresponding angles like the ones you see highlighted here. Then we have alternate angles, we have consecutive angles, we have interior angles, and we have exterior angles. So all of those words kind of get combined together to make different angle relationships. So let's talk about what they mean individually first. So when you talk about the words alternate and consecutive, those are always going to be related to the transversal. The word alternate means like you're on opposite sides, right? If you're alternating a line, I'm going one side, I'm going to the other. I'm alternating it. So alternate means opposite sides of the transversal. Consecutive is going to be then the other part of that. It's going to mean the same side of the transversal. So then we have the words interior and exterior. Those words relate to the parallel lines. So remember, parallel lines never touch. But if you're looking at parallel lines, whether they're horizontal or whether they're vertical, you can always look at angles that are in between those parallel lines. Those would be your interior angles. In starts for in between and N starts interior. So interior means we're in between the parallel lines. So then the word exterior is going to be the other way, outside of the parallel lines. So now let's combine those words together and see what relationships we get. So then alternate exterior angles means our angles are going to be on opposite sides of the transversal, but then outside of the parallel lines, like the ones you see highlighted here. Notice one angle is touching each of the parallel lines. You're never going to have these relationships where they're touching the same parallel line. They got to have one touching each of the parallel lines, right? So one's touching A, one is touching B. So then alternate interior angles, we're still gonna be on opposite sides of the transversal, but now we're gonna be in between the parallel lines, like the ones you see highlighted here. And again, you'll notice that you have one of each angle touching each of the parallel lines. And then we have consecutive exterior angles. So remember, consecutive means now we're on the same side of the transversal, but we're outside of the parallel lines. So consecutive exterior angles look like the ones that are highlighted here. And again, there's one angle each touching the parallel lines. And lastly, we have consecutive interior angles. So we're still on the same side of the transversal, but now we're in between the parallel lines. Now that we know what all of those words mean, now let's talk about how all of those angles are related. So if you'll notice, corresponding angles are the same sides. And corresponding means in the same position, so it means they also have the same angle measure. So corresponding angles are going to be congruent. Alternate angles, if you notice, are also the same size. Whether they're alternate interior or alternate exterior, they're going to be the same size, either both acute or both obtuse. So they're also going to be congruent to each other. And then we have our consecutive angles. Consecutive angles, they're on the same side of the transversal. So whether they're consecutive interior or consecutive exterior, notice that you have one of each type of angle, one acute and one obtuse. So those angles are always going to be supplementary. So remember, corresponding angles, vertical angles, and alternate angles, those are all going to be congruent. And then consecutive angles and linear pairs, those will always be supplementary. Hope that clarifies some angle relationships for you guys. See you next time.